This is the trick. The way that your brain estimates group consensus is kind of crazy. The loudest voices, repeated the most, are the majority.
I wanted to say one thing before we start. I spent a lot of time in Utah. Utah is also my hometown in the US. Utah, Logan. I went to grad school.
That's a beautiful part of the country, huh?
I know. It is a north side, so it is also closer to Yellowstone and Teton. And so when I kind of read your story in your book, like about your time in Utah, it was like...
No, Logan is fantastic. It's just, I'd go up there a lot. My buddy went to school there too, and driving up that canyon up to Logan
Canyon, yeah.
So.
But I also spent a lot of time in Ogden area too, because there are a lot of like great mountain trails around there. Yeah. Do you know Adams Canyon by any chance?
Of course.
There's like beautiful waterfall there, and like that is the summer activity.
I went to Weber State, which is in Ogden.
Yeah.
I grew up in Layton, which is 20 minutes south of Ogden. And then also Hooper, which is like west of Ogden.
Exactly.
Okay, so basically you'd always just spend time in all the places I live. This is great. Now you have to just come live in Boston for a while, and you'll have completed the whole.
I mean, complete the whole story. Yeah.
That's right.
Let's just start from the definition of collective illusion. What is collective illusion, and how is it formed?
Sure. So collective illusions are basically social phenomena where most people in a group end up going along with a view that they don't personally agree with, just because they incorrectly think that most other people in the group agree with it. And so as a result, entire groups can end up doing something that almost no one in the group really wanted. It's funny, you'd imagine, how do you get that kind of systematic misunderstanding that it might require some bad actor, some manipulation? But in reality, it's really about our biology, right? And it's really two things you have to know about your brain to understand how we get collective illusions. The first is that every human being has a conformity bias. We'd rather be with our groups, not against our groups. And that's not bad. Look, and we all know too much groupthink can be a problem, but the truth is our desire to go along is actually quite productive, right? Looking to other people to learn from them, social learning, the transmission of knowledge and values across time. I mean, all of that is in part because of our conformity bias. But it's important for viewers to recognize that's not a choice. We are hardwired with that, and some people care more than others, but like we all care a little bit. But for conformity to even work, you have to know what it is your group thinks, or else what would you conform to? This is the trick. The way that your brain estimates group consensus is kind of crazy. The loudest voices, repeated the most, are the majority. If you take that conformity bias with this shortcut for estimating group consensus, and you put it into the age of social media. So let's just take Twitter specifically. In the US, about 80% of all content on Twitter is generated by only 10% of the users. According to Pew Research, that 10% isn't remotely representative of the rest of the country. So that they tend to be more extreme on almost every social issue. If only 10% of people hold of you, but you think it's 80%, then your brain's going to say, oh, that's the majority. And unless you're willing to go against your group, which most people aren't, you're either going to say nothing, just self-silence, or you're going to literally outright lie and go along with the group.
And it is even hard because you can see the real-time statistics of how many this tweet were retweeted and how many people actually watched this YouTube video, how many people liked it. So you feel like that's like real-time data. And when that number is big, it's really easy to think that, this is a majority opinion. And because of that, it is more likely that this is true, right?
That's exactly right. And recognizing that there's no way to sort of intellectually get yourself out of that. This is how your brain at a very primitive level is trying to gauge what popular opinion is. And so it will feel right, even if you know it's not. As I talked about in the book, state-sponsored efforts to manipulate this is happening from, Russia, but also China does this really well. It's not that they're propagating lies. It's that they will go into social media, analyze it, find fringe views, and then use bots to swarm and retweet. And you can basically dictate what people think group consensus is.
In Korea also, when the news is up, these people go first and then kind of start forming the opinion over there by making the comments about celebrity and some contents and some political opinions. And of course, as you said in the book, our brains are lazy and they want to take the shortcut. Oh, this is opinion here, and then it got a lot of like, and I think I agree with that. I will just go with the majority vote here. And that is kind of very efficient thought process, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is occurring.
In the book, I laid out a few traps where we can easily fall into this place where we both fall for illusions, but also contribute to them. And that one is this copycat trap where, you're like, well, this many people can't be wrong. Even a book, for example, it matters what the early reviews are. On Amazon, if your book comes out and someone doesn't like it right off the bat and they give it 1 star, if you get 3 or 4 of them, it will have a massive effect. We just can't trust that anymore. And we're going to have to rely more on ourselves and learn to be honest with each other about what we think.
So it may be a little bit silly question, but I was thinking about online rating system when you're reading the book a little bit. So it happens to me, let's say that I want to buy a coffee machine, and espresso machine needs a lot of research. You'll have to learn a lot about the machine before you make the purchase because it's a complicated machine. But my brain is lazy and I do have other things to take care of. So I just go to Amazon and buy a machine that a lot of people rated high, right? Without really getting into detail. This kind of thing happens not necessarily only with the espresso machine. How would you apply collective illusion concept here, and what is a way to smartly use the online rating system, because we rely so much on it now?
I love that, and this happens all the time, and we don't want to ignore it because actually we want to learn from other people. In the book, I used an example that had, I think, a lot higher stakes, but same principle, which was the kidney transplant list. This stuff has real world consequences where people start passing on a kidney, and I'm like, well, why did they pass on it? I'm going to pass on it too. And we end up discarding kidneys, which is just crazy. My advice for strategy is if the stakes are low, don't worry about it. If it doesn't matter, right? For example, if you can return the espresso machine, then, whatever, right? When it's going to matter, you want to be really careful that you're not just falling for this trap. And so one of the easiest things you can do to know whether it's just an illusion where we're all copying each other is ask the question why. So why is a great question, because if people are just copying, they'll say well, because it's the best. They can't really answer why it is they're doing it. And that is a dead giveaway. The kidney transplant list, that's how they solve that. If I'm number 10 on the list, all I knew before was the first 9 passed on the kidney. And that led me to go, well, they must know something I don't know, so I'm going to pass on it too, to having them say why they passed on it. The reason the why is so valuable is 2 things. 1, if they can't answer it, it's an illusion. 2nd, their context may be very different from yours. How many times have we read a review with 1 star and you're like, oh, they must have hated it. And they're like, it didn't get shipped in time. And you're like, that's not about the product. So understanding the why is really important. And we often talk about the wisdom of the crowd, which is definitely true, right? It is the case, the aggregate of individual choices often does end up being more stably representative than any one. But the assumption that people forget is it's only true if the individuals are making independent choices. So once they're correlated, once they can see other people's views and they're influenced by them, then it's not wisdom anymore.
Why do we have to care? Why is it so dangerous to have collective illusion?
Yeah. Great question, because let's go back to with conformity. We all know that there's a danger of groupthink where we all just go along. That's true, but at least there you knew what the group wanted and you're like, I don't really agree, but everybody else really does think this. And you're making a trade-off of do I want to stick to my guns or would I rather just be with the group? And I will say there is some value to being with the group. That's fine. The only truly, really bad decision is when you didn't agree with the group to begin with, but you went along, you gave up what you wanted to say or do to be with the group, but the group didn't want that to begin with, right? So now this is the point of collective illusions literally destroy the very group that you care the most about. Because nobody in the group wants what the group is doing anymore. It destroys the trust of the group, confidence in it, the cohesion, and ultimately it will destroy societies. Like, especially in the US right now, so much of what's looked at as polarization, like we're so polarized on everything. At my think tank Populous, we have, I believe, more private opinion data on the American public than any other organization. There's some things we are really polarized on, like in the US, like immigration, stuff like that. But on most things, they're just collective illusions. We're actually not polarized, but we believe we are. And so the consequences are real. So in terms of why should we care, like we're literally tearing ourselves apart in the States because we're so convinced the other is so different than us. And it's like, it's bad enough if that's true, but it's absolutely tragic when it's not, but we're still living with the consequences of it. You know, what you see is healthy groups actually usually have norms of real expression, like the ability to tolerate a little bit of dissent, right? Just so you get enough challenge to make sure, is this really what we think? And groups that end up not allowing any kind of dissent tend to stagnate and then go away. One of the things that worries me the most, and we see this all over the world and in the States in particular, just the level of self-silencing that's going on right now. It's very, very dangerous. And it's not to say, look, you might be wrong. You might have a bad idea, but having people not feel like they could even say what they really think is really not good for anybody.
I want to talk a little bit more about self-silencing. I experienced it a lot. Sometimes I have different opinion, but I ended up not speaking out. And there are two main reasons when I do that. A, I feel like my opinion is not going to make any difference. Already the majority vote has been determined. Because of the efficiency of decision making, you know, we cannot take forever to make this decision. It is also very important to make a speedy decision and move on to the different agenda. So I feel like I'm hurting that efficiency, so I should keep a silence. And B, sometimes I feel like I don't have enough intellectual confidence, if that makes sense. I feel like I may be wrong and I don't want to feel ashamed by speaking out. Like some people could say that you don't know well, you know, that's your opinion, that's your limited perspective, and we're not going to do that here. So always that kind of imaginary situation in my head will silence me and I ended up not speaking out. What can we do to have intellectual confidence? A, and also B, how can we reconcile between efficient decision making and getting diverse opinion as much as possible?
Well, I think you've really hit it on, because, yeah, like you said, we need to make decisions. And your first point about, like, it seems futile. Like, if basically everybody already agrees, I'm going to speak out, and, like, even if I'm right, it's not going to change anything. And then I could be wrong, and I risk the shame of, like, revealing, because everybody has like this imposter syndrome at some point, right? We're like, what am I missing? Why is everybody saying this? And like, maybe I'm just not that smart about this. And so one of the things that's really important there is, in terms of the efficiency side, I think the research is pretty clear on this. Like, groups that function really well for decision making have a little bit of built-in tolerance for some dissent, so that, right? Not forever. You got to make a decision. But like, this is where, like, for example, the concept of devil's advocate comes in. Like the idea of saying, well, let me just play devil's advocate for just a second. Why that's important is if you do that, then I feel like I can speak up without it looking like it's just my opinion. I'm like, well, here's another way to think about it. But in terms of the confidence side of this, I think the research is very clear that if you frame it as questions rather than challenge, it doesn't come off as, you say, like, I have a question. Can you explain a little more? And the research is clear. That's not interpreted as you directly challenging the group, and you don't come off as like ignorant. So frame it as questions, ask questions about it. The last thing I'll say, and I talked about this in the book as well, is especially where you don't feel like you can disagree with the group, but you're not sure whether it's an illusion, you don't have to confront the group. You just inject uncertainty. So, for example, let's say it was in a voting decision and everyone seems to, we're all going to vote for candidate A. And you're like, I think I'm going to vote for candidate B. Why does you say, I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm not sure. Because here's what's cool about that. Group psychology research suggests that groups don't immediately get mad at you for disagreeing or for not being sure. They'll try to convince you. And then the group really does try to convince you. You can be sure that's actually the group's view.
We have 4 minutes, Dr. Rose. So is there anything that lastly you want to share with Korean readers of yours or Korean audience in general? Please feel free to do so.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited. I have to say, and I'm not just saying this, like I have not been to South Korea, but I absolutely want to. So it's on my list. It's when I go because I think
you went to Hong Kong. I read that story from the book.
I did.
Next time, Korea, please.
They invited me to Hong Kong. So as soon as I get invited, I'm coming. When I think about Korea and I think about how do we preserve all that's really fantastic about that culture and how its work ethic, its aspirations, its ability to do things, we don't want to lose that, right? And I think that like in a lot of ways, as we have to, in a future that has to make a little more space for individuality and self-expression, both for its creative potential, right? But also for its ability to disrupt and dismantle illusions that can really harm it. I actually think Korean culture is actually best placed for it because the ability to say, look, we're going to do this. We're going to treat individuality not as individualism, not as separate, but it's just appreciating human distinctiveness and learning how to modify our norms a little bit to allow more space for that. Look, I think if I were betting on any culture to get this right and to actually benefit from it, I do think Korean culture is right at the forefront. And I'm excited about where your society goes off of this. And I can't wait to visit.